What if the greatest technology ever discovered is not something we build outside ourselves, but something already living quietly within us, waiting for us to understand how powerful it truly is? The deeper I explore the relationship between the brain, the body, and human consciousness, the more I realize that we have dramatically underestimated our own potential. For generations, people were taught to think of the brain as a biological machine, a processor of electrical signals, little more than an organic computer responding to external conditions. But modern discoveries are beginning to reveal something far more extraordinary. The brain does not simply react to reality. In many ways, it helps shape the reality we experience. Every thought we repeat becomes a signal. Every emotion we sustain becomes chemistry. And over time, those signals and emotions begin influencing the body in measurable ways. This changes how we understand health, stress, resilience, learning, relationships, and even the limits we place upon ourselves. I find it fascinating that the human brain is constantly rewiring itself. Neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity, but behind the scientific term is a revolutionary idea. The brain is not fixed. It changes according to experience, attention, emotion, and belief. The pathways we strengthen become easier to access. The thoughts we rehearse become more automatic. In other words, what we consistently feel and think gradually becomes part of who we are. This raises an uncomfortable but empowering question. If the brain is continually adapting to our internal world, then how much of our daily reality has been unconsciously programmed by repetition? Many people spend years repeating silent patterns of fear, doubt, guilt, or emotional exhaustion without realizing those states are influencing the nervous system every day. The body begins responding to familiar emotions as though they are normal conditions. Stress hormones rise, sleep changes, focus weakens, energy drops. Over time, the brain becomes conditioned to expect struggle, and the body follows the pattern. Yet the opposite appears to be true as well. Research into meditation, focused attention, emotional regulation, and visualization continues, showing remarkable effects on the human brain. Brain scans reveal structural changes in individuals who practice deep mental focus consistently over time. Areas connected to empathy, memory, self-awareness, and emotional balance often become stronger. Even the immune system appears responsive to emotional states and mental habits. What fascinates me most is that ancient cultures seem to understand aspects of this long before modern technology existed. They believed the human mind was deeply connected to the body and to the surrounding world. While their language differed from scientific terminology, the central insight was surprisingly similar. Human beings are not passive observers. We participate in reality through attention, emotion, expectation, and perception. Today, science is beginning to catch up with some of these forgotten observations. Consider the placebo effect. In medical studies, people sometimes experience measurable healing after receiving treatments with no active medical ingredient. Their belief alone triggers physical responses within the body. This does not mean disease is imaginary. It means belief itself possesses biological influence. The brain interprets expectation, and the body responds chemically to that interpretation. To me, this changes everything about how we understand human potential. If belief can influence biology in limited clinical settings, then what happens when belief is reinforced every day through emotion, focus, repetition, and meaning? What happens when a person truly accepts a new possibility about themselves instead of endlessly rehearsing fear and limitation? The brain begins adapting to the new signal. This is why emotional states matter so deeply. Emotions are not abstract experiences floating somewhere outside the body. They are electrical and chemical events. A moment of fear can change breathing patterns, muscle tension, heart rhythm, and hormonal activity within seconds. A moment of gratitude or genuine connection can shift the nervous system in an entirely different direction. The body listens constantly to the emotional language of the mind. I have come to believe that one of the greatest challenges of modern life is that we are surrounded by systems designed to capture our attention while disconnecting us from inner awareness. Endless stimulation trains the brain toward distraction. Constant stress keeps the nervous system locked into survival mode. And when survival becomes the dominant state, creativity, intuition, emotional clarity, and deeper perception begin fading into the background. But when the mind becomes still, something remarkable often happens. People suddenly notice insights they were too distracted to hear before. Their thinking becomes clearer. Their emotional reactions become less automatic. Their bodies relax. Their awareness expands beyond constant noise and pressure. In that state, many individuals report feeling more connected, more intuitive, and more alive than they have in years. Perhaps this is part of the hidden potential we are only beginning to rediscover. The human brain may not simply be an organ that stores information. It may function more like a dynamic interface between thought, emotion, biology, memory, and perception itself. And if that is true, then every repeated thought, every emotional habit, and every moment of focused awareness may be shaping us far more deeply than we once imagined. Because once we understand that the brain is always listening to the story we tell ourselves, we begin realizing that the most important conversation happening in our lives is the one unfolding silently within us every single day. And that realization alone begins to change. I think this is why moments of emotion often leave permanent impressions on the brain. The mind prioritizes experiences carrying emotional weight. Events filled with fear, wonder, joy, grief, or inspiration become encoded because the brain interprets emotion as importance. We are teaching the nervous system what matters through the feelings we repeatedly revisit. When a person changes emotional patterns, the brain begins reorganizing around new experiences. New pathways form, new reactions emerge, old assumptions weaken. Eventually, the individual who once believed they were trapped inside limitation may begin discovering abilities, perceptions, and possibilities hidden beneath years of conditioning. And the moment that process begins, because the brain slowly stops identifying with the old story and starts responding to an entirely different internal environment. I often think about how many human abilities remain dormant simply because people have never been taught how deeply the mind and body communicate with one another. From childhood, most individuals learn how to memorize information, follow routines, and react to external expectations. Yet very few are ever shown how thoughts influence physiology or how emotional states shape perception. We are educated about the world outside us while remaining largely unfamiliar with the systems operating within us. The brain is constantly receiving information from the body, not just sending commands to it. Signals travel through the nervous system every second, carrying messages connected to emotion, stress, safety, and awareness. This means the body itself participates in thought. It is not merely a passive container for consciousness. In many ways, the body acts like a subconscious interpreter of experience, continuously informing the brain about how to respond to reality. This may explain why chronic emotional states become so difficult to escape. A person who lives in prolonged anxiety eventually conditions both the brain and body to expect tension as a normal baseline. The nervous system adapts to that emotional frequency. Even when external conditions improve, the body may continue producing the same stress responses because the internal pattern has become familiar. But familiarity is not destiny. One of the most powerful discoveries emerging from modern neuroscience is that awareness itself can interrupt automatic patterns. The moment a person becomes conscious of a recurring emotional cycle, they create the possibility for change. Instead of unconsciously repeating the same reactions, they begin observing them. And observation changes the relationship between the mind and the pattern it once obeyed automatically. I believe this is where true transformation begins. Not through force, not through denial, but through conscious awareness repeated consistently over time. When people learn to slow their thoughts, regulate breathing, and intentionally focus attention, measurable changes begin occurring inside the brain. Stress responses decrease, emotional regulation improves, concentration strengthens. Some studies even suggest that practices involving focused awareness may influence gene expression connected to inflammation and recovery. The implications of this are profound because they suggest that consciousness is not isolated from biology. It interacts with it continuously. What fascinates me even more is how imagination affects the nervous system. The brain often responds to vividly imagined experiences in ways surprisingly similar to real experiences. Athletes have used mental rehearsal for decades because visualizing movement activates many of the same neural circuits involved in physical performance. The body prepares for the experience, the mind repeatedly envisions. This reveals something extraordinary about human potential. The brain does not always distinguish sharply between external events and internally generated emotional realities. If a person repeatedly imagines failure, fear, rejection, or danger, the body reacts accordingly. Heart rate changes, muscles tighten, hormones shift. Yet when individuals cultivate elevated emotional states connected to confidence, gratitude, purpose, or compassion, entirely different biological responses begin unfolding. The internal environment changes first, and then behavior follows. I sometimes wonder how different society would become if people truly understood the long-term effects of their emotional habits. We carefully monitor the food we eat, the air we breathe, and the environments we enter, yet we rarely examine the emotional conditions we expose ourselves to every day. Constant outrage, fear, distraction, comparison, and psychological overload gradually shape the chemistry of the brain. The nervous system absorbs experience like a living recording device. This is why moments of silence can feel so uncomfortable at first. When external stimulation disappears, many people suddenly encounter the emotional patterns they have been avoiding. But beyond that discomfort lies something important. In stillness, the brain begins shifting away from reactive survival states. Mental noise softens, attention deepens, subtle awareness emerges, and within that awareness, people often rediscover capacities they thought they had lost. Creativity expands, intuition sharpens, emotional resilience grows stronger. Some individuals even report heightened clarity during moments of deep calm, as though the brain functions more efficiently when it is no longer overwhelmed by constant stress signals. This aligns with growing evidence showing that chronic stress impairs memory, learning, immune function, and decision-making. The brain performs differently depending on the emotional environment surrounding it. To me, this suggests that human potential is not fixed at birth. It is influenced continuously by how we think, feel, perceive, and respond to life. The limits many people accept may reflect conditioned patterns more than actual capability. A person who repeatedly tells themselves they are weak, incapable, or powerless gradually trains the nervous system into alignment with that identity. But when new emotional experiences challenge those assumptions, the brain begins reorganizing itself around new possibilities. This process does not happen overnight. The old patterns resist change because the brain prefers familiarity. Predictability feels safe to the nervous system, even when those familiar patterns create suffering. Yet every time a person chooses awareness over reaction, calm over chaos, or intention over unconscious habits, they strengthen new neural pathways. Little by little, the brain learns a different way of being. And perhaps this is one of the most important realizations of all. Human consciousness may not be limited to passive observation of reality. It may participate actively in shaping biological responses, emotional experiences, behavioral patterns, and even the quality of perception itself. The more we understand this connection, the more responsibility we inherit for the inner worlds we cultivate daily. Because if the brain is continuously adapting to the emotions, thoughts, and expectations we feed into it, then every moment of awareness becomes an opportunity to reshape the architecture of who we are becoming. And once a person truly understands that principle, they may never look at their own mind in the same way again, because they begin sensing that hidden beneath ordinary thought exists an untapped capacity waiting patiently to emerge. Capacity capable of redefining consciousness and transforming lives forever, worldwide. And the moment people begin sensing that hidden capacity within themselves, they often realize that the greatest barrier they ever faced was never a lack of intelligence or ability, but a lifetime of conditioning that taught them to underestimate their own minds. For centuries, human beings have searched outward for power, searching for systems, technologies, and external solutions capable of transforming life. Yet some of the most important discoveries now emerging point inward instead. They suggest that the brain possesses adaptive capabilities far beyond what earlier generations imagined. The more researchers study consciousness, memory, perception, and emotional regulation, the more complex the human mind appears to become. I find it remarkable that the brain can physically change according to focused experience. London taxi drivers, for example, were found to develop stronger spatial memory regions after years of navigating complex streets. Musicians often show enhanced neural connections linked to coordination and auditory processing. Individuals recovering from injury sometimes retrain entirely different parts of the brain to perform lost functions. These examples reveal something extraordinary. The brain is not static architecture. It behaves more like a living ecosystem, responding constantly to use, attention, and adaptation. This means the life we repeatedly practice becomes biologically embedded within us. When a person rehearses fear every day, the brain strengthens pathways connected to anxiety and survival. When someone practices compassion, focused learning, or emotional resilience, those pathways strengthen instead. In many ways, the brain becomes shaped by repetition. The experiences we emotionally reinforce become instructions for the nervous system. What makes this even more fascinating is the relationship between attention and perception. The brain filters enormous amounts of information every second. We only become consciously aware of a tiny fraction of what our senses collect. This means perception itself is selective. Our beliefs, expectations, emotional states, and previous experiences influence what the brain chooses to prioritize. Two people can experience the same event while interpreting it completely differently because their internal conditioning shapes the meaning they assign to reality. This has profound implications for human potential. If perception can be influenced by emotional patterns and belief systems, then expanding awareness may literally change how people experience the world around them. Someone trapped in chronic fear often sees danger everywhere. Someone grounded in calm awareness notices opportunities, connections, and solutions that fear once concealed. The external world may remain the same while the internal experience changes dramatically. I believe this is why practices involving mindfulness, contemplation, and intentional focus continue attracting scientific attention. They appear to strengthen the brain's ability to remain present instead of constantly reacting to imagined threats or conditioned memories. Brain imaging studies increasingly suggest that regular meditation can reduce activity in regions associated with excessive self-rumination while strengthening areas connected to emotional balance and awareness. In simple terms, the brain becomes less trapped inside automatic mental noise. And perhaps that noise is one of the greatest hidden drains on human energy. Many individuals spend enormous mental resources replaying old fears, anticipating future problems, or comparing themselves against unrealistic expectations. The nervous system remains activated long after stressful events have ended. Over time, this constant internal tension affects concentration, sleep, immunity, relationships, and physical well-being. The body carries the emotional residue of repeated thought. But when individuals consciously interrupt these cycles, something powerful begins happening. The brain gradually learns that safety, calmness, and presence are possible. Stress hormones decrease, breathing changes, muscles relax, thought patterns become clearer. The person begins responding to life with greater awareness instead of automatic survival reactions. This is not mystical thinking. It reflects the measurable relationship between mental states and biological function. One of the most inspiring aspects of this research is that change remains possible throughout life. For many years, scientists believed the adult brain lost much of its ability to grow and reorganize. Today, evidence suggests the opposite. New neural connections can form well into later adulthood when people engage in meaningful learning, emotional growth, and focused mental activity. The human brain appears designed for continual evolution. That realization changes how we think about aging, limitation, and personal identity. A person is not permanently defined by earlier emotional conditioning or past experiences. While the past leaves deep impressions, the brain continues adapting according to present attention and repeated experience. This means transformation remains biologically possible even after years of habitual thinking. I often reflect on how different education might become if children were taught these principles early in life. Imagine growing up understanding how emotional states influence memory, creativity, learning, and health. Imagine learning how to calm the nervous system during stress, or how focused attention strengthens neural pathways. Such knowledge could fundamentally change how people approach conflict, relationships, and personal growth. Instead of seeing the brain as a machine reacting helplessly to circumstance, people might begin understanding it as an adaptive partner capable of extraordinary change. And perhaps this is where the future of consciousness research becomes truly exciting. Scientists are beginning to explore questions once considered impossible. How do emotions influence cellular behavior? How does perception alter physiology? Why do some individuals demonstrate remarkable resilience under extreme conditions while others collapse under chronic stress? What hidden mechanisms allow focused intention to reshape neural patterns over time? The answers may transform not only medicine and psychology, but our entire understanding of what it means to be human. Because the more deeply we study the brain, the less it resembles a simple biological computer, and the more it appears connected to a vast network of emotion, perception, memory, adaptation, and conscious awareness operating together in ways we are only beginning to comprehend. And the deeper we explore those mysteries, the more we may discover that human potential has never been fully measured at all. Perhaps the next breakthrough will not come from discovering something new, but from finally understanding the power hidden within the mind, waiting beneath distraction, fear, and conditioning for humanity to recognize, nurture, and awaken it with deliberate awareness and compassionate intention. Because once human beings begin consciously directing their attention instead of surrendering it to constant distraction, the brain starts revealing abilities that once seemed impossible or unreachable. I believe one of the greatest misunderstandings about the human mind is the assumption that consciousness is merely a byproduct of brain activity rather than an active force participating in how the brain develops. The more scientists investigate awareness, intention, and emotional states, the more difficult it becomes to separate thought from biology completely. Every experience leaves traces within the nervous system. Every repeated emotional pattern strengthens certain neural connections while weakening others. In many ways, we become what we repeatedly practice internally. This realization carries enormous responsibility because it means that thoughts are not entirely harmless background events. They influence chemistry, perception, behavior, and eventually identity itself. A person who spends years trapped in hopelessness often develops an entirely different nervous system response than someone who consistently cultivates purpose and emotional resilience. The difference is not imaginary, it becomes biological over time. What fascinates me is how quickly the brain adapts to emotional environments. Studies involving chronic stress show measurable shrinkage in regions associated with memory and emotional regulation, while prolonged calm, focus, and meditation appear capable of strengthening those same regions. The brain is continuously responding to the quality of our inner experiences, and yet most people were never taught how to manage that inner world. Modern life floods the nervous system with stimulation, notifications, noise, pressure, comparison, urgency, and information overload keep attention fragmented almost constantly. The brain rarely receives uninterrupted periods of stillness. Without stillness, deeper awareness becomes difficult to access because the mind remains locked in reactive processing. I sometimes think of the nervous system like water. When water is constantly disturbed, it becomes difficult to see beneath the surface. But when the surface grows still, clarity emerges naturally. The same may be true for consciousness itself. Beneath mental noise exists a deeper level of perception many people rarely experience because their attention is continuously pulled outward. This may explain why moments of profound insight often arrive during silence, solitude, or deep reflection rather than during chaos and distraction. The brain functions differently when it is not overloaded with stress signals. Creativity expands, intuition becomes sharper. Connections between ideas appear more fluid. The mind begins operating from coherence rather than fragmentation. Coherence is an important concept because researchers increasingly associate emotional balance with synchronized activity throughout the brain and body. When emotional states become chaotic, physiological systems often become dysregulated as well. Heart rhythms change, hormonal balance shifts, cognitive performance weakens. But during states of calm, focus, gratitude, or deep emotional alignment, the body frequently moves toward greater synchronization. The brain and body begin communicating more efficiently. I believe this connection between emotional coherence and biological function may become one of the defining discoveries of future science. For generations, emotions were often treated as secondary experiences disconnected from physical health. But growing evidence suggests emotional patterns influence inflammation, immune responses, cardiovascular function, and even recovery from illness. The body remembers emotional experience. This does not mean every illness originates in the mind, nor does it mean positive thinking alone solves complex physical conditions. But it does suggest that emotional states contribute more deeply to overall well-being than many people once believed. The nervous system responds continuously to the meaning we assign to experience, and meaning itself may shape biology. Think about the difference between challenge and hopelessness. Two individuals may face similar circumstances, yet one perceives the experience as temporary and manageable, while the other interprets it as permanent defeat. Their bodies often respond differently because perception alters emotional chemistry. One nervous system moves toward resilience while the other remains trapped in prolonged stress. This is why belief matters so profoundly. Belief is not simply intellectual agreement. It is an emotional instruction repeatedly communicated to the body. When people genuinely believe they are powerless, the nervous system often reflects that state through hesitation, anxiety, and diminished motivation. But when individuals develop authentic conviction in their capacity to adapt and grow, the brain begins supporting entirely different behaviors. Confidence changes physiology. Purpose changes physiology. Hope changes physiology. And perhaps this is part of the hidden power humanity is only beginning to understand. The brain does not operate independently from emotion, expectation, and perception. It responds to them constantly. Every emotional state becomes part of the environment, shaping neural activity and biological response. What excites me most is that these insights offer possibility rather than limitation. Human beings are not permanently trapped by past conditioning. The brain remains adaptable throughout life. New experiences, emotional breakthroughs, focused practice, and conscious awareness can reshape neural pathways even after decades of habitual thinking. Transformation remains possible because the brain never stops learning from experience. I have often wondered how many extraordinary human abilities remain dormant simply because society conditions people to focus almost entirely on external achievement while neglecting inner mastery. People train their bodies, careers, and technical skills, yet rarely train attention itself. They rarely learn how to regulate emotional states intentionally or direct awareness with consistency. But the quality of attention may determine the quality of life more than any external factor. Where attention flows, neural energy follows. The brain strengthens what it repeatedly focuses upon. Fear grows stronger when constantly rehearsed. Gratitude grows stronger when consciously cultivated. Compassion, resilience, creativity, patience, and emotional balance all develop through repetition because the nervous system adapts to whatever patterns dominate awareness most consistently. And once a person fully understands that principle, they begin realizing that human consciousness may represent one of the most powerful forces influencing the future of human experience because every thought repeated with emotion becomes part of the architecture shaping perception, biology, behavior, and ultimately the reality a person lives within every single day of their life. The implications of that realization are almost impossible to measure because it suggests that hidden within the human brain exists not only intelligence, but the capacity to consciously participate in our own evolution in ways previous generations could barely imagine. And if humanity is truly capable of consciously participating in its own evolution, then the future of human potential may depend less on external technology and more on whether we learn how to use the extraordinary systems already built into the mind itself. I often reflect on how little most people actually know about the relationship between attention and energy. Wherever attention repeatedly goes, emotional energy follows. The brain reinforces whatever receives consistent focus. This means our inner dialogue is not simply commentary floating through consciousness, it becomes training for the nervous system. A person who constantly anticipates failure rehearses failure neurologically before any event even occurs. The body reacts as though the imagined outcome is already real. Muscles tighten, breathing becomes shallow, stress hormones rise. Over time, the brain begins treating fear as a familiar operating condition, but when someone intentionally practices calm focus, confidence, and emotional stability, the nervous system gradually adapts to those states instead. The brain learns through repetition, whether the repetition is helpful or destructive. This may explain why emotional habits become so deeply ingrained. Many people assume personality is fixed, yet much of what we call personality may actually reflect repeated neurological conditioning. Reactions become automatic because the brain values efficiency. Once patterns are repeated enough times, they require less conscious effort. But automatic does not mean permanent. One of the most hopeful discoveries in neuroscience is that conscious interruption of old patterns can gradually weaken them. Every time a person chooses a new emotional response, instead of repeating an unconscious reaction, they begin creating alternative neural pathways. At first, the change feels unnatural because the brain prefers familiar patterns, yet repetition slowly shifts what feels normal. Eventually, the new response becomes stronger than the old one. I think this is why transformation often begins invisibly. Before external behavior changes dramatically, internal processes are already reorganizing beneath the surface. The brain is adjusting, emotional responses are shifting, awareness is expanding. What once triggered automatic fear may no longer carry the same emotional intensity because the nervous system has started learning a different relationship to the experience. And this process extends beyond emotion alone. Researchers studying focused attention continue discovering fascinating effects involving memory, learning speed, and cognitive performance. When attention becomes fragmented, the brain struggles to process information deeply. But sustained concentration appears to strengthen neural integration, allowing information to move more effectively into long-term memory. In other words, attention shapes intelligence itself. This realization becomes even more important in a world filled with constant distraction. Modern systems compete aggressively for human attention because attention influences behavior, emotion, and decision-making. Yet every moment of distraction conditions the brain towards shorter focus spans and greater mental fragmentation. The nervous system adapts to whatever environment it experiences repeatedly. If people spend years consuming rapid stimulation without periods of reflection or stillness, the brain may gradually lose some of its ability to sustain deep awareness. This is why silence can initially feel uncomfortable. The mind has become conditioned to constant input. But beyond that discomfort lies tremendous opportunity because stillness allows deeper neural processes to emerge. Some of the greatest insights in human history likely appeared during moments when the mind became quiet enough to perceive patterns hidden beneath ordinary noise. Creativity often arises not during frantic activity, but during states of openness and relaxed focus. The brain forms connections more freely when it is not overwhelmed by stress. I believe this is one reason dreams, intuition, and sudden insights continue fascinating scientists. The conscious mind does not process information alone. Beneath conscious awareness, enormous amounts of pattern recognition occur continuously. Sometimes the brain integrates information in ways we do not fully understand until clarity suddenly emerges, seemingly out of nowhere. Perhaps human consciousness operates on levels far deeper than ordinary waking awareness reveals. The more we study the brain, the more mysterious it becomes. Despite all technological advances, scientists still cannot fully explain how subjective awareness arises from physical matter. They can measure neural activity, electrical signals, and chemical exchanges, yet consciousness itself remains one of the greatest unanswered questions in science. And maybe that mystery is important, because it reminds us that human beings are not merely mechanical systems. There is depth within the human experience that cannot be reduced entirely to numbers and formulas. Emotion, imagination, meaning, creativity, and awareness all shape how reality is experienced. The brain may be biological, but consciousness transforms biology into lived experience. That transformation affects every aspect of life. A hopeful mind sees possibility where fear sees limitation. A calm nervous system perceives solutions more clearly than an overwhelmed one. A person grounded in emotional balance often makes wiser decisions than someone trapped in chronic stress. These differences influence relationships, health, creativity, and resilience in profound ways. I sometimes wonder what humanity might become if people collectively understood the importance of inner regulation. Imagine a world where emotional awareness was considered as essential as intellectual education. Imagine children learning how stress affects the nervous system, how focused breathing alters physiology, and how attention shapes emotional experience. The impact could reshape entire generations. Because once people realize they are not powerless observers trapped inside automatic mental patterns, they begin reclaiming authorship over their own consciousness. They begin understanding that thoughts influence biology, emotions shape perception, and awareness itself can redirect the brain toward healthier and more coherent states. And perhaps this is the deeper message emerging from both ancient insight and modern science alike. Human beings may possess far greater internal power than they were ever taught to recognize. Not supernatural power, but the extraordinary capacity to influence thought, emotion, behavior, resilience, and biological response through conscious awareness practiced consistently over time. The brain is listening constantly to the emotional language of the mind. And when a person finally understands that every repeated thought becomes part of the nervous system's programming, they begin approaching their inner world differently because they realize that the future version of themselves is being shaped silently by the patterns they reinforce today, whether they are aware of those patterns or not. And that realization alone can become the beginning of an entirely new level of human awakening.
When we begin exploring the true potential of the human brain, one of the most important realizations is that the brain is not simply a machine locked into fixed patterns. It is adaptive, responsive, and deeply influenced by the experiences we repeat every day. This idea alone changes how we think about personal growth, emotional healing, and even human potential itself. For many years, people believed the brain became mostly fixed after childhood. Scientists assumed that once certain neural pathways formed, they remained largely permanent. But modern neuroscience has revealed something extraordinary. The brain is constantly changing. This ability is called neuroplasticity, and it means the brain can reorganize itself based on thoughts, emotions, habits, and experiences. Think of the brain like a forest trail. The more often we walk the same path, the clearer and easier that path becomes. In the same way, repeated thoughts and emotional reactions strengthen specific neural pathways in the brain. If a person constantly rehearses fear, worry, or self doubt, those pathways become stronger over time. Eventually, the brain begins treating those emotional states as normal. But the opposite is also true. When someone practices calmness, gratitude, focus, or emotional resilience consistently, the brain starts strengthening those pathways instead. This is why small daily habits matter so much. Every repeated emotional experience becomes training for the nervous system. Now, this does not mean people can simply think positively and instantly transform their lives. Human emotions are complex, and real healing often takes time. But what science increasingly suggests is that awareness combined with consistent practice can gradually reshape the brain itself. One of the simplest examples of this can be seen in stress. Imagine someone who spends years living in constant pressure. They worry about finances, relationships, work, and the future every day. Over time, the body adapts to this emotional environment. Stress hormones remain elevated, sleep quality changes, focus weakens. The nervous system begins operating in survival mode almost continuously. The body learns stress through repetition. This is why many people feel anxious even when nothing dangerous is happening in the present moment. The brain has become conditioned to expect tension. The nervous system no longer knows how to relax naturally because stress has become familiar. But here is where things become hopeful. The brain can also learn safety. Practices like meditation, deep breathing, mindfulness, journaling, quiet reflection, or even slow walks in nature help calm the nervous system. At first, these practices may feel uncomfortable because the brain is not used to stillness. But with repetition, the nervous system gradually adapts. The body begins recognizing calmness as safe instead of unfamiliar. This process is similar to strengthening a muscle. Emotional regulation improves through consistent practice, not overnight transformation. Another fascinating concept involves the connection between thought and biology. Researchers continue discovering how emotional states influence physical health. Chronic stress can affect immune function, inflammation, digestion, heart health, and energy levels. On the other hand, positive emotional states like gratitude, connection, and purpose appear to support healthier biological balance. This does not mean emotions control everything, but it does mean the body listens carefully to the emotional signals produced by the mind. A simple real life example can help explain this. Think about what happens before an important presentation or difficult conversation. Even before anything happens externally, the body reacts internally. The heart beats faster, breathing changes, muscles tighten. Why? Because the brain interprets the situation emotionally and the body responds to that interpretation. Now imagine the opposite. Think about a moment when you felt deeply peaceful, appreciated, or emotionally connected to someone you love. The body responds differently. Breathing slows, tension decreases, the nervous system shifts into a calmer state. This shows us something powerful. Thoughts and emotions are not abstract ideas floating in the background. They create measurable biological changes throughout the body. This is why awareness matters so deeply. Most people move through life reacting automatically to old emotional patterns without noticing them. Someone criticizes them, and anger appears instantly. A challenge arises, and fear takes over automatically. But the moment a person becomes aware of these patterns, they create the possibility for change. Awareness interrupts automation. Instead of unconsciously reacting, the person begins choosing their response more intentionally. Over time, those intentional responses reshape the nervous system itself. This is also where attention becomes incredibly important. Modern life constantly pulls attention outward through noise, information, comparison, and distraction. But attention is like sunlight for the brain. Whatever receives repeated attention becomes stronger neurologically. If people focus constantly on fear, outrage, negativity, or comparison, those emotional states grow stronger internally. But if attention is directed toward growth, learning, compassion, and emotional balance, different neural pathways strengthen instead. This is why protecting your mental environment matters just as much as protecting your physical environment. One practical exercise viewers can begin immediately is something very simple: intentional pauses. Several times each day, pause for 1 minute and observe your internal state without judgment. Notice your breathing, notice your thoughts, notice emotional tension in the body. This small habit begins strengthening self awareness. Another powerful practice is emotional reframing. When difficult situations arise, instead of immediately asking, "Why is this happening to me?" try asking, "What can this experience teach me?" That small shift changes how the brain interprets challenge. The nervous system moves away from helplessness and toward adaptation. Gratitude is another scientifically supported practice that can influence brain function over time. When people intentionally focus on meaningful, positive experiences, the brain begins becoming more sensitive to those experiences naturally. Again, this does not erase hardship, but it changes the emotional patterns dominating awareness. And perhaps the deeper lesson behind all of this is that human potential is far more flexible than many people realize. The brain is not frozen, the nervous system is not fixed. Consciousness is not powerless. Human beings possess the remarkable ability to influence their inner world through repeated awareness, emotional regulation, and intentional focus. Little by little, those internal shifts begin transforming perception, behavior, relationships, and even physical well being. The greatest transformation often begins quietly: a calmer reaction, a healthier thought, a moment of awareness before responding emotionally, a single decision to stop rehearsing fear. These small moments may appear insignificant, but repeated consistently, they become the foundation for profound change because the brain is always listening, always adapting, and always becoming shaped by the emotional experiences we choose to reinforce every day of our lives.